Victoria Ikede is a dynamic BIM specialist and digital technologies educator with proven experience in implementing and managing large-scale BIM projects to the highest industry standards. With a solid grounding in ISO quality and BIM standards, she combines both technical expertise and strong project management skills to deliver excellence across every phase of the digital construction process. Victoria's academic journey and research work at the University of Sheffield provided her with a deep understanding of digital technologies, which she now leverages in both practice and education. She is the founder of the BIM Mentor, a YouTube channel through which she shares her industry insights and teaches coding and digital tools in an accessible, beginner-friendly format, bridging the gap between architecture and technology. Her thought leadership has earned her speaking engagements at prestigious industry events, including Toronto Metropolitan University Architecture Symposium 2024, RAKE Webinar, Design Smarter, Not Harder, AI Strategies for Modern Architects, Alberta Association of Architects, Co-Design with AI, AIA Canada Society, Automating Drudgery with AI, The Building Show, Navigating the Impact of AI on Architecture. West Africa Digital Conference. Victoria is passionate about equipping architects, especially in underrepresented regions, with the digital skills and mindsets needed to thrive in the future of architecture. She continues to be a vocal advocate for the intelligent integration of BIM and AI in practice, education, and innovation. Let's welcome architect Victoria Akpezi Ikede.
Hi, Victoria. Welcome to Akpezi.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's an interesting thing to have in ArchitectsCorner. I've seen what you're doing both on LinkedIn and on other media platforms, and I find it very interesting. So that was why I reached out to you to have you on ArchitectsCorner. I'm sure that with what we'll be discussing tonight, it's going to be beneficial to anyone who is seeking to go into what you are doing in architecture. So thank you so much for coming on ArchitectsCorner. We are grateful to have you.
Thank you for having me. You've actually had one of my earliest teachers on your channel, Architect Amobi. She taught me in UNEC when I was like a teenager. So to even be on the same platform as her, I'm very honored. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay. So your journey with BIM is inspiring, but someone just hearing the word BIM for the first time, how would you define it in simple terms, and why should any architect care about it in today's world?
Perfect. Thanks. That's a wonderful question, and I'm glad you emphasized simple terms, because I think a lot of people have heard about BIM and they think they know what it is, or they feel they know what it is, but anyone who is asked to explain provides an explanation that makes them even more confused. So I will try and keep it as simple as I possibly can. For most people, BIM is Revit, because that is the mental association, is that if I'm using Revit, I'm doing BIM. That is what we call a software-driven BIM approach, where we as an industry, as architects, sometimes we've collectively forgotten that Revit is a software. It is not mandatory or even required at all. We've all just sort of agreed that we will all use Revit. But the best way to explain BIM is to give you an analogy, because if I start to talk about architecture and construction, it's very easy for it to get very confusing. The easiest analogy I can give is a graphic designer, because I think architects, for more better or worse, we do graphic design and we use Photoshop. Now, there are some things you have to do where you go to Photoshop, and there are some things you have to do where you just go to even PowerPoint or even Microsoft Word, as simple, as frustrating as that application is for images. Depending on the presentation you're trying to do, you don't always go to Photoshop, right? But sometimes when you need to do something crazy in Photoshop, you have that one person in the office that knows Photoshop, or maybe they don't only know Photoshop, they know Illustrator, they know CorelDRAW, they know all of the tools, and they can even do Lumion and do animation. So they know the different ways to communicate your idea to a client. In this example I've given, Revit is Photoshop. And the person that knows Photoshop, CorelDRAW, Lumion, V-Ray, everything is the BIM manager. So in that example, would you then say that Photoshop is visualization? And I think that is the only way I can ever get this message through to architects, is that when something becomes the de facto standard, I think that's the official term. Revit is the de facto standard for our industry for producing drawings, models, construction documentation. We have forgotten that we chose this. It was not required. As an industry, we could have decided to use ArchiCAD or Tekla or MicroStation. We all tested it at different levels and realized actually Revit is the best fit. And because a lot of people use it, it's just easier to keep using it. But the information we make with Revit, it has to go for costing. It has to go to a contractor. It has to go to someone analyzing for energy consumption, since we're all meeting sustainability goals.
Yeah.
The person who understands not only how all of these tools work, but also how the data communicates across, down to when the building is in use, where if you're in a building that has smart systems like sensors or electrical management system, you don't need that one person in the estate. If you live in a serviced estate in Nigeria, you could have someone who is the person that knows everything. You don't actually need the one person in the estate that knows everything. Okay, power has gone out. Where is okay, or whatever his name is. Technology allows you to actually store all of that data somewhere. And that data builds on what the architect designed. They pass it on to the next person, pass it on to the next person, pass it on to the next person. Even when the building is in use, they keep updating the model with how many electricity meters have we now installed? What is the plumbing situation like? Where did we change something? This elevator that we specified didn't work. Let's update it. The vision for BIM was that we would have a whole life cycle process of data at each phase for each member of the industry, not just the architect. And the BIM manager was supposed to be this very technically savvy person that could understand all of them, or at least support the BIM manager in the other space. So in an ideal utopian scenario, the architect would have a BIM manager, the structural designer would have a BIM manager, the client would have a BIM manager, and each of them would discuss, how do we keep this data so that even when I am doing something 20 years after I'm done with my contract with you, I still have my original model and I can add things to it. I don't need to pay another architect from scratch in 30 years' time when maybe you're no longer practicing. I have the model. I can maybe just get the building services consultant or whatever to update the model. That was the intention. It is still a model that is work in progress across all continents of the world. I think some continents are way more advanced, like in Europe, I think they're doing very impressive things with BIM. But there are still challenges. And I think the main challenge is that the purpose was not clearly communicated. For many people, they woke up one day and they were being forced to use Revit. And that's as much as they know as to why they are doing BIM. So my goal and my personal mission is to always give context. So back to my analogy about visualization, if you know that spending maybe 6 hours on Photoshop is the equivalent of going to, I don't know which easy software for images, maybe even just Paint or Microsoft PowerPoint, will give you the same result, or at least the result that gets you through to the next stage. The only person that is qualified to make that call is the person that knows both tools and their capacities and can advise you, okay, for this tool, it must be Photoshop. For this tool, we can get away with PowerPoint, right? The only way you know that is if you ask the person. If you think you know it all, because you do images, you spend 6 hours on Photoshop when you could have just done it in the industry by communicating with my colleagues in other disciplines, but also checking ways that data can be transferred or preserved, and then providing expert advice and even supporting on implementation to the architect. And because it is not a specific thing, which is something I want to emphasize, a BIM professional can work for any part of the industry. Many BIM professionals work for contractors because they are a lot busier on site. A lot of BIM specialists support facility management. A lot of BIM specialists support structural engineers. If you're in a society that has transportation infrastructure, managing it virtually is very important because going on site is very expensive. So BIM was supposed to be a cheaper way to solve problems on the computer before we go to site and spend all that money. And whenever people say BIM is expensive, it's because the short-term costs are more visible than the long-term cost of, we went to site, the drawing wasn't correct, we need an RFI. Okay, 2 more weeks of waiting. We forget those costs because that's sort of how, in some ways, the human mind is limited in seeing things that far ahead. So BIM was supposed to make construction cheaper by us doing a kind of stage play or rehearsal of everything we want to see on site in the safe confines of the computer. And that is the easiest explanation I can provide.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. So, Victoria, if I would ask, how is BIM useful for architects? With what you've explained so far as the simple definition of BIM, how is it useful for architects?
That's a very good question. So the main use cases that I found architects like about BIM is for clash detection, which is everything we do now in terms of coordination. As far as I saw when I was in Nigeria, is that we bring our CAD plans side by side on a screen. Someone is with a pencil and we're marking where we think there's a clash. So the burden is on the architect to be very good at reading a floor plan, and you're basically training your eye to be a scanner of sorts. With BIM, you are creating a model for the architect and also for the other consultant. So in many cases, BIM doesn't work if only one person wants to do BIM. Everyone has to do BIM. And then you do that clash process because software can actually check when things are clashing. You don't need eyesight to do that. You can actually check when things are clashing. The other thing that I find most architects like is for just seeing your design in 3 dimension. It is both a positive and a challenge because unfortunately these tools were designed so that architects would learn them. So back to my example about Photoshop, there isn't any graphic designer that needs an expert in Photoshop to do something. They all know Photoshop. You can't be a graphic designer and not know Photoshop. In architecture, unfortunately, only a few people know the full extent of the tools and what they can do. And so the person designing feels this software isn't helping me because the software is not letting me do my design. But it's because it's just maybe a little bit more complicated to learn than how we were taught architecture. A lot of us learned architecture by sketching, by drawing. These tools require a bit more of effort. And that's why you need to collaborate, have a very strong collaborative relationship with your BIM specialist or BIM manager so that they also have architecture training and they can see your idea and tell you how the tool supports your idea or where the tool is limited in your idea. People often forget that every BIM professional has a degree in something else. BIM on its own is a support role. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. A BIM manager either has an architecture degree, an engineering degree, or some other degree. So they are not non-architects, as it were. They just have spent more time understanding the tool, where you have spent more time understanding the building as a product. And so it has to be more collaborative. Instead of writing it off as it's too hard, software won't let us do, you should push your BIM specialist to say, I want this sketch in my model. And it is your job to find out how. And if the person is competent enough, they will find out because most of the most complicated buildings we see and celebrate were done using computer applications. They were not hand sketched. And that goes back to my point about Revit as a tool. There is no aspect of BIM that requires Revit to be your tool of choice. We've all just sort of accepted it. But there are many people who do BIM without Revit because BIM is about the eye, the information. And there are many ways to host information in a model, regardless of where you draw it. Yeah.
I think you've highlighted some of the questions I was going to ask. I think this should be a question from someone. The person asks, must you have a first degree in architecture or engineering to be able to be a BIM manager? Or do you just go into it and learn on your own? How does that work?
That's a very good question. So BIM on its own is not an industry. And I mean that in the sense that if you are looking at BIM, you either fall into engineering and construction or software development.
Okay.
Some BIM people exist in the software development space where all they do is make tools for engineers. Some BIM people exist in the engineering space where all they do is research which tools will support any particular project's goals. The only way you can be that person to know what the engineer wants is to know engineering or architecture. I always say engineering because BIM is whole life cycle. It's not just design. And I know this is a platform for architects, but our context in Nigeria, we define everything as architecture. So the architect is doing interior design, the architect is doing landscape design, the architect is doing specification. It's not the case for the people who even came up with the idea of BIM. They designed it for trade specialists. So when I say engineering, I'm speaking more in the broader context of the building as a product of both architectural thinking and engineering. It is very hard to be useful either as a software developer or as someone working in an office if you don't already have a background. I think at the minimum, a bachelor's in one of the fields is enough. I don't think you need, for example, a master's in architecture to be a BIM professional, but I do think a bachelor's would help. And back to my point about BIM not being for architects only, it's just that because we tend to lead the construction efforts, it's very useful to us. A BIM manager can be a structural engineer. A BIM manager can be a mechanical engineer. A BIM manager can be a site engineer. It is not specific to architecture. So to answer that question, you need basic education in the aspect of BIM that you want to focus on. If you like just the software stuff, you like coding, you like to push tools to the limit, then spend more time getting software engineering certifications, data analysis certifications, and then you can just focus on that full time. You don't need to be an architect to do that. But back to that mindset of collaboration, if you are trying to be everything, you will not succeed because BIM is a collaborative practice by definition. You need to talk to the design experts. If you're working as a software site, for example, you still need to understand the pain points of an architect to make a software that can support an architect. So your ability to communicate and identify problems and identify solutions is the main skill set. It's not necessarily degree related. However, because it's emerging in some senses, I don't think you will find a job advert where they're not expecting you. And it depends on where you live.
Okay.
That is another thing, is it depends on where you live. You need to look at the job market for where you live. If it's possible in some parts of the world that you don't need um, a different kind of education. Because some people are just modelers. Some people just learn Revit and they're BIM modelers and they get a job for just modeling. So it depends on what you're trying to do.
Thank you so much for that response. So we're having a series on ArchitectsCorner, which is focusing on career path in architecture. And
Mhm.
we are at the intersection of architecture, technology, innovation.
Mhm.
If you had to summarize the future of architecture in one word, what would
Mhm.
it be and why?
Oh, that's a very heavy question. The future of architecture in one word is collaboration. And that's a very simplistic one. It's not my most creative answer. Um, architects having educated in a way where they are, in a way, the lone genius. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's this lone, the genius that's just in a secluded space working on their own. There's that, like, it's mine mentality that architects, I think they have it before they go to architecture school, and architecture school does a good job of reinforcing that mindset. But I think with the way artificial intelligence has fundamentally changed our world, it is impossible to remain in your secluded corner. You need to speak to other people and collaborate with other people. That is my perspective as someone who works in my space, because what I find is when I have conversations with people who do what I do, we are operating in like 2020, sorry, 2035. Like we're
Mm,
already seeing like this is where it's going.
mm,
We're pushing ourselves. We need to learn this skill because this is where it's going. When I'm in a room full of architects, they're in 2025. They're thinking of today and now, and we have a housing crisis. We have an affordable housing problem, which there is value to both sides because we can't all just be thinking about the future. There are problems
mm.
today,
Sure.
but the reason we're always lagging behind with innovation is because we don't talk to the people who are living in the future. We're just like, oh, we want to do this, but we don't know how. We don't have the tools. But there are people in another room that have all the tools that can't find the architect to ask the question. So I think we need to open up a bit, and I think it starts with the education. We need to teach architecture in a more collaborative way where it's not about fulfilling your ego or having a massive structure that
Mm,
you did. It is a collaboration with intellectual minds. I'm a very big fan of the film industry, so that's the biggest comparison I can make. You don't have a movie where it's just the director or just the writer. It is a team effort, and that is what you get, and that's why you're like, wow. So I think we need to improve on that aspect, and it starts from how we are educating architects.
Thank you so much for that response. I think I find that analogy very interesting and intriguing because of the way you explained it. So if I'm to ask, what made you pivot from traditional path of architecture design into BIM?
That's a very good question. So I think, and this sounds philosophical, but I think BIM is a calling. Just in the same way a lot of people find architecture to be a calling, I think people who want to do BIM have a deep frustration with how architecture is practiced in the absence of technology. Because again, a lot of architecture education excludes the technology. And there are people who, once they discover it, there's a hunger to just know more, break the tool. What more can I do? And you keep going down that line until you find yourself so far away from discussions about the social aspect of architecture. So I think I was always going to be a BIM manager. If I had known that there was in fact, there's no way to know, because when I was studying architecture in my second year, that was in 2009 or 10, wait, yeah, 9 or 10, 2009 or 2010. There wasn't any BIM jobs. It did not exist. But even then, I was a person who would always go to my computer applications classes. We had a very wonderful professor then, architect Ifanacho, rest in peace. He passed away. But him just teaching us Revit, teaching us SketchUp, I was always in the lab, and he recognized my passion for that. And he would always call me in when he would do these projects with people from like Kenya, or they were trying to document the whole University of Enugu campus on Google Earth. He would call me in because I cared about the technology. So I think that if you are the kind of person that cares about technology, it's not something you can turn off, because what will happen is you will find yourself in spaces where people are trying to do something and your brain is just so easy because you think in a technological framing, but to the person who is more design focused, they don't understand what you're saying. And if there's anyone watching this and you're starting to experience those frustrations, then I think you need to explore BIM. Because that is the first sign that you see technology as a means to support an industry that is notoriously known for being traditional. But there's another aspect to why I chose BIM, which is that architecture as a profession is very regional. So if you are an architect trained in Nigeria, you know how to design buildings for Nigeria. If you're an architect trained in Canada, you know how to design buildings for Canada. And for every country you go to, you are no longer a professional in that country. I had aspirations of being in a more flexible role where I can support anyone, anywhere. And that was the other thing that supported my decision to do BIM. It's because BIM is BIM wherever you are. It is not regional and like location specific. So that was the other reason I decided to just focus on it full time.
Okay. Okay. So if I would ask also, since you had your first degree in, I think even your second degree, right? Your master's.
I had my first degree in Nigeria, University of Nigeria Enugu campus. I had my second degree, Masters of Architecture from University of Sheffield in England. And then I had my third degree, Masters in Building Information Modeling, as a joint degree from University of University of Ljubljana in Slovenia and Politecnico di Milano in Italy. So my education outside of Nigeria has been predominantly in Europe as a continent. Currently, I am now working as a BIM coordinator in Toronto, Canada, in North America. And I don't think an architectural expertise would have allowed me to move so easily across these continents. But also, I don't think I would have even been able to get into the schools, because architecture is something you build on. Your first degree sets you up for your second degree, sets you up. So I wouldn't even have gotten in to start with. Yeah, so there's that as well. But yes, that's my education. It's very global. I have perspective of 3 different continents. So yeah.
So what I wanted to ask was, since you started, because as a teenager who just entered school that's in Nigeria, and you're just going with the flow, how did you at some point say, okay, this is where I'm going to, this is where I'm going to pursue? And
Yes.
how did you make that transition?
That decision, that's a very good question. So my second degree in the UK is notorious for being the first country to make a public policy on requesting professionals to provide deliverables in a BIM format. So they had, at the time I was in school there, that was in 2016, there was they called it Digital Built Britain, where they wanted all public projects, so any project for the government had to be delivered in BIM. And to support that, so many frameworks were going on at the time. So many things were happening at the time to make BIM part of education and also support professionals. So I was in school at that time where it was just becoming something that everyone was trying to figure out. And I thought it'd be interesting to do my thesis on the subject. So I did my thesis on interoperability, which is a big word that says how do I export from Revit to Civil 3D to AutoCAD to Tekla without losing my data? That was what I did my thesis on. So I had to study, it was like a 10,000 word dissertation. All of my colleagues were designing sustainable environments, climate friendly. They were doing architecture and design thing because it was an architecture program. It was not a BIM program. I was like, I want to know why can't I copy from one software to another? So I already had that. I think there's an internal need to understand technology that drives most BIM professionals, where you really just want to know why not? Like, why can't I just do this thing that I want to do? Um, and so that's what I did. And it was very challenging because I needed to somehow communicate that thesis as a design thesis for an architecture master. But it was really a 10,000 word dissertation on BIM, IFC, exchange standard, that sort of thing. So in terms of my education on BIM, that was what forced me to learn about it. It was a 3-month thesis sprint. But because I was also there at the time, A, very young, B, on a scholarship, I really wanted to do well. So I went like above and beyond. I made a distinction, not to brag, but I think some people do care about how they need to know how intelligent is the person they're listening to. I went really all out to do a good job. And so my understanding of BIM was with the pioneers, because all the resources I was reading were actually considered pioneering at that time. Bilal Sukar, there's some names, Chuck Eastman, people who came up with this methodology, this framework of how do we deliver buildings digitally in a sensible way for professionals. And those were the people I studied, right? But then moving back to Nigeria after that program, I wanted to work as an architect. But then I got into ATO Architects for my interview as an architect. ATO himself saw my qualifications and saw me talk about BIM and said, no, you need to be a BIM manager. So he made me a BIM manager. It wasn't the other way around. That's why I will always give credit to ATO Architects in the sense that they are visionary in how they see the industry and what they want for the industry. Because he told me, no, you should be the BIM manager instead of an architect. And in giving me that responsibility, I had to grow into it. I had to make sense of it, provide business value, and define what it meant. Because there's BIM where you're doing like design, but there's the contractual aspect, there's the document, there is a contract documentation aspect to BIM. I think a lot of people don't really realize when they're doing architecture. So at the time, because we're undergoing a quality management system, the ISO 9001, I was also a huge part of that process because BIM operations, all of those business things are part of BIM. And I think, frankly, the reason BIM hasn't succeeded for many people is that it's seen as a young people thing. But in reality, it is a senior management thing. BIM was meant to be a senior management thing. So in that sense, I got a lot of support from them. They wanted to do BIM. They wanted to compete in a global market of people in the UK are doing BIM. We want to do BIM. You have the training. So this is your responsibility to push us to that level, right? So that's kind of how I started building on my expertise before I went back to get formal education on BIM.
So, okay. That's quite interesting. That's I think maybe along the line your calling was just getting expanded and expanding.
It's a combination of luck, hunger, but also I think something a lot of young people underestimate is your impact on the world. So when you go into an office, you want to be told, what do they want from me? how can I please them? You don't imagine there is a way to influence them or tell them, actually, this is what you could be doing, and this is how you could be making more money. And I think that training I got not from any of my architecture education. I actually took a gap year in between working before I went to do the master's in architecture, and I was freelancing doing some work. I worked with someone who's an entrepreneur, and he taught me the business side of working. And I think that's honestly what makes the difference between me and many people in my domain is I learned about how to think as an employee, but like an entrepreneur, where you are in the organization, but you are helping the organization to make business value. And I think that's the difference. If you're thinking about BIM as like technology, you want to learn coding, you want to just do cool coding software stuff, it will be quite challenging in Nigeria just because of the context and the economic challenges we have. But if you think about it as almost like an entrepreneur where you want to give BIM as a service to make money, you start to get more creative with what should we do. So for example, in ATO, I was doing training. We would get professionals to come into the office to get trained. I'd make sure they have food. I made sure they had the software installed. We're doing all of that. By teaching people, you learn a lot more. We were also exploring, we need to do an as-built project. Instead of going there to measure the building, how can we use technology? I would say, oh, let's use a drone. We can do a point cloud and get that into Revit. And they would support me. They would take me out there with a drone, take all the images I need, give it to me. I do. So you need to, it's not enough to rely on people who have already paid their dues to tell you. You need to do the work. And the internet has made it easy for anyone who is dedicated and curious enough to find information. Okay, next question. I feel like I'm preaching.
Okay, exactly. Okay, so
Yeah.
from hand-drawn sketches to
Yeah.
AI-generated models, architecture has come a long way. Where do you see the next big disruption happening in our industry?
That's a very good question. So, to say the next big disruption would be to undermine what AI is as a disruption. I think you've already mentioned AI-generated models. AI is not disrupting architecture just by producing renders or images. AI is, before now, we did not have technology that could recognize things on its own, which is you say something in your English language, it understands what you're saying. Computers read code, they read binary, they don't read English. We've not really had that. We've not had something that can improve on itself, where the first time you ask AI for something, it's horrible. But as you keep coaching it and telling it, change this, do this, fix this, it gets better. And I think people forget before AI, the only way to get an image was go to Google, download image, Photoshop image. There was no way to just speak images into existence, literally. So I think AI is very much underestimated as a disruption, and we're only in the early stages of it because all of these changes we're seeing is between 2020 and 2025, it's just 5 years. Technology has an exponential rate of acceleration. In the next 5 years, I don't know what's going to happen because it's going to change. AI has changed life as we know it. It's as disruptive as the internet, where there was just no way to communicate with people all over the world until the World Wide Web. That is what AI is we've never had technology that could do this. We don't know what will come next. It could be good, it could be nothing, or it could be bad. We just don't know because this is a brand new thing. Every other thing has just been building on, previous technology, previous ideas. This is a brand new thing where, for the most part, people who are not technically savvy can now do things without needing to learn. You can make a software without knowing how to code. There was never a time you could do this.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy when you start getting used to like the noise of technology to just forget that just 2 years ago, if you needed and pre-Canva even, if you needed an image, you
True.
needed someone who was a graphic designer.
True.
Technology changes how we see even ideas, because someone with an idea for an app right now is like, oh, I'll just find an AI that can help me test it. A few years ago, I don't have money for software engineer. I don't have money to pay for, like, the limitations are just removed. And yes, AI is not perfect. This is not a AI like pro conversation where I'm saying go use AI and forget people. AI is limited. AI is not perfect. AI is not creative, in my opinion. I think human beings are still more creative than any machine because I code as well. So I'm saying this just out of the fact that I code. Human beings are more creative than machines. It's not possible for a machine um, to be as creative as a creative human being. However, AI is leveling the playing field where before you needed to be a certain kind of specialist to do certain things. Now it is forcing us to build on the strength of ideas where it is really the best idea that gets in the door. No longer the person that has money to pay for a fancy presentation or the person that has money to pay software engineer. It is now who has the best idea. And I think that is going to change our profession in ways that I feel like we are not even engaging with enough. But I'll stop there with my AI preaching.
Okay, so let's go into specialization and the rise of BIM. Specializing in BIM used to be a niche, now it's a competitive edge. Why do you think BIM has become non-negotiable for architects of the future?
It's because technology has changed how we deliver projects. So in the past, it used to be you could just do your CAD drawing, send it to the next person, they copy paste. But now, because people are working in models, they see the value of models, which is honestly why BIM even became so widely known, is that there was real business value in let's stop designing in 2D and start thinking in multiple dimensions. Let's add the cost in there. Let's add the visuals in there. Let's put the schedule in there. There's value in it. It takes time to realize, but it's there. People are starting to see that actually, when I do all my work in 3D, there's less mistakes on site. So I'm going to keep doing 3D. And when you're the one in charge doing your 3D, you see the benefits. You're working with a team that is like, oh, we still do 2D. You insist that they move to 3D. And so as more people start to insist, as clients become more aware, because a client that receives a model has been spoiled. I'll tell you that. Like they will not accept just a drawing when they know they can like do the orbit thing and actually see, or you put it in a VR thing, they're walking around their house. They're not gonna accept, oh, I sent you a flat line work that I don't understand. The 2D approach is really good for professionals, but it doesn't support the non-trained user. So BIM is becoming more required because people are becoming more educated on the value, which was always the reason we started in the first place. And I think it's important that we keep remembering why we do this because it is challenging. It is challenging, but there's a reason why we chose to do this to begin with.
Thank you so much for that response. You've once said that BIM is not just a software, it's a mindset. Can you unpack this idea for us?
Thank you for that question. So I think I touched on it a little at the beginning, but the goal of building information modeling was to do information modeling. We need to start thinking of the building like a data set. We need to start thinking that the fact that someone has to count how many walls, how many windows, how many doors, square meter footage of how many tiles, that is data. There is data principles that can be applied to make it more efficient, more cost effective, more sustainable, right? If you think about BIM as one software, you get stuck on the software. And that's where the frustration comes, especially as an architect, is that you have a vision, but the software is limited because, again, software cannot be as creative as people. BIM lets you think, okay, if what I want is to transfer information from this to this, what other way can I achieve that since the software is holding me back? Is there a way I do my 2D thing in CAD and maybe take the 3D to maybe Rhino and then force the data in Rhino? Like what are my options here? When you start to think of it as information modeling, you are more open to options versus I need to use this software. The software is not working. Software is stupid. What's wrong with this software, people? You know what I mean? So the goal of BIM was never software. It was just a more intelligent way of doing buildings. And because we're in a tech-driven era as the human race, it has to be supported by technology. So that's just what it is.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. Let me chip in this question before our 5 minutes elapses. So,
Okay.
How did you personally pivot from or into becoming a BIM specialist? What challenges did you face, and what did you do differently, or would you even do differently if you are to start again?
Okay, that's a very good question. So for me, I think it was a combination of timing, luck, but also demonstrated expertise. So I like to explain things in analogies because I find that's how people understand things better. In Nigeria, we know about skits. We have a very expansive skit making industry. I don't think you could ask any of them, how did you pivot into skit making? They posted a video, it gained traction, they kept going.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a similar thing where I developed expertise in BIM. People saw value in it and kept asking me to do more of it. And so I kept going until it became globally more structured enough that I could go and do a degree in it. So now that I actually have a degree, I can actually make a case for why I am the most competent person to be in that role. Whenever you're going for a BIM role in parts of the world where there are actually BIM roles, you're competing with other people who also think that they are good at BIM. Having a degree for me has been the easiest way to just be like, I am one step ahead of all of these people applying for these positions. So in my very unique case, I have a degree. Most BIM managers do not have a degree. The easiest way that they pivot is that from their organization, they start to prefer solutions. They start to say, this thing that's taking us weeks, I know a way we could do it in days. They become that voice of, this is how technology can help us be more efficient. And then when they ask, because you have to ask, when you ask your leadership, I think I'm doing this BIM thing. Can I be a BIM whatever? If they are supportive, they will let you. So for me, it was a combination of education, being in the right organization that saw the benefits, and also just being very curious about the subject. Like even in my spare time, I would just be learning about Dynamo, learning about, like, I just really enjoyed subjects. A lot of my education was from LinkedIn Learning when I was starting because a lot of experts have courses there. And then with that, I was able to practicalize and learn my own lessons on the job, which is why having supportive leadership is key. You also need to be a little bit stubborn to do this job. And I don't mean stubborn in a disruptive way. I'm not recommending to cause chaos on teams, but the people you work with don't know BIM as much as you at any given point in time. You have to be able to advocate for your importance, for your value, and it involves communicating. You can't just assume that if someone is asking you to do something a certain way, is because they know better and they're asking you to do it a certain way. In many cases, they don't know more than what you know when it comes to BIM. And so you need to learn communication, influence, a bit of change management where you're asking people to change how they work. How does that affect people? So now it's a bit more known. Like when I started BIM, no one knew what BIM was. So it was an uphill climb. But now you can actually just go to an office where the leadership knows what BIM is and they want to see if you can actually deliver. But a lot of it is really you wanting to succeed, to support the project to succeed and to support yourself to succeed. So that's more or less how I pivoted and the challenges I faced. In terms of what I would do differently, I think I would accept that I wanted to be a BIM professional sooner because I kept trying to be an architect and I wasted so much time trying to be an architect. Architecture is fantastic. I love buildings. I love the education that architecture gave me. But I think architects make architecture the only option. So if you talk to another architect, they will not tell you, oh, you should do BIM. They'll tell, no, no, no. Why don't you just like apply this your BIM thing to architecture? It is the sum total of our experience. It is the beginning and end of what we do. I would have more easily recognized that I was not going to be a traditional architect, and I think I would have spent more time developing my BIM skills versus trying to develop my architecture skills. It's not a waste because, again, BIM is a support role, so you cannot support what you do not know. I needed that experience to know what I know about BIM today. But in terms of what I would have done differently, I would have just committed to BIM quicker. And I think I would have learned a lot more. Um, and then because you're limited depending on where you live, I would have leveraged like what you're doing with ArchitectsCorner, leverage the power of the global connection that is the internet. Don't restrict yourself to where you live, where you work. Be a bit more global and also business minded of if what I'm doing provides value, where can I find the people who see the value? And sort of think about it in that way.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. And you just mentioned that you were looking for the architectural, but then can a professional combine both worlds, being a designer and a BIM specialist, or does he have to require total commitment to just one side?
I think a professional can definitely combine both worlds, but that professional has to be some kind of genius or no family commitments, or you have to be a bit, um, I think maniacal is the only word I can think of, but in both fields, there is an equal and proportional amount of learning that needs to happen. To be a good architect, you need to learn about buildings. You need to go to site. You need to touch materials. I understand that. To be a good BIM person, you need to know not just one tool. You need to know all of them. You need to even know how the data is how this thing you see that's a 3D model, what is the code behind it, and why does it look like a 3D model? How do these tools talk to each other? There is an equal and proportional amount of learning on both sides. To be very good at both, you'd have to spend every waking moment learning. There are many people who are above average at both. Even those people, I know them, they are very hardworking. But to be a specialist, and it's a choice in the end, because I think a lot of people don't want to give up the creative excitement of being an architect. So it is a choice. You can do both. I find more fulfillment from the non-creative side, the technology side. So I'm fine to give up the creative side. And the more time I waste competing with the people who are fully committed to the creative side, the worse I get at what I want to do. So these are like internal questions to ask yourself. What actually fulfills you because you spend most of your human life working. You need to have some fulfillment. If doing the BIM thing won't fill you up, you need to do the architect thing. Then it's good enough to just know enough to support your architecture. But at some point, you would need to choose because architecture also is not just design. Like you start out designing, but you need to manage clients, manage your consultants. It's a very, very challenging professional practice. So you can only answer those questions for yourself, but there is difficulty in both, and I think it's worth just being aware of that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for that response. Then I think I will be going into the global industry trends, then gradually niche down to Nigeria. So
Right.
with AI, machine learning, and automation entering the mix, are we headed toward a future where buildings design themselves, or will the architect always remain at the center?
My personal opinion is that the architect would always remain at the center. I may be wrong. Honestly, we don't know. Technology is accelerating at a pace that even we are all going to be surprised. But I think that machines lack the ability to be human, and spaces are designed for humans. So they will always need an architect who is a human being to be at the center of the process. However, what we call architect is usually a team of different people under maybe the one name or the one architect that we know. So the real question is, which of those people do we need? And for that, I don't have the answer. But when we say the architect, it's a team, and AI can replace some parts of that team, even today, but more so likely in the future. So the real question is, which member of the team are we keeping? And to be very frank, I have no idea.
Okay, but then I think you just mentioned that a BIM specialist is already in the future. So my
Yes.
question would be, with which emerging technology beyond BIM do you believe will complement architectural design in the next 5 years?
I think it's AI. I think it has to be AI. BIM again is really not, I know it's hard to explain what BIM is because it's so many things. BIM is not a technology. It's a framework of let's deliver buildings digitally, but it's not any specific technology. AI is also part of BIM because it's still that mindset of how do we deliver buildings with technology. Specific technology we all use for now is like a Revit or a specific software. AI as a way of using technology is going to change how we practice architecture, because the reason many people struggle with Revit today is the learning curve. It's difficult to learn Revit if you are too busy doing architecture. I empathize with that. AI is going to make it so that you can talk to Revit in English or whatever language you speak and get what you want. Maybe not today, hopefully in our lifetimes, but it will happen. And so there will be a point where you don't have to spend hours and hours like I did going to school upon school to know these things. You can just ask the technology and guide it because you have the design expertise. So I think that would be the most disruptive one, is actually AI. In my opinion, we don't know the future. We've gone through blockchain, we've gone through VR, we've gone through so many things, but I think AI is really going to change things.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. Before I go into the one thing every architect that in developing countries such as Nigeria should start doing today to align themselves with global industry. First of all, I want you to respond to, what is that documentation you're doing with BIM? What exactly is it?
Okay. That's a good question. So when we think architecture, it's easy to think buildings. But architecture, in some cases, it's infrastructure, it's roads, bridges. I know that's civil engineering, but there are some times when an architect is needed to design some aspects, right? The documentation is when you, as a traditional architect, you're thinking you're delivering a set of drawings. That is our main deliverable, and someone is checking those drawings. As a BIM professional, I am delivering a set of models and also a database in some cases. Sometimes I need to structure the model in a way that the data makes sense to the person receiving it. It's not just that I drew walls and put dimensions and it looks good in 2D, but when you open the model, it's copy, copy, copy one, review, like it's messy. I need to submit that file to someone in a professional manner. So it's understanding how to package a model as a submission, which is more advanced in some places than others. And if you're in a team where everyone is using Revit, that's like, oh, anyone can do that. In many cases, in almost no cases, is everyone using Revit. In many cases, the structural engineer might prefer a Tekla or something else. The BIM person knows how to get my Revit data and that Tekla data so that the person on site can use both of them without having to buy Revit and Tekla. So we need a third format. It's almost like exporting this video to MP4 so that your video editor can edit. It's the same thing, but I need to know how I'm getting my Revit data. Not just the Revit model as a 3D model, but all your cost information, that's if it was put in the model, should be inside. The schedule in some cases could be inside if we define that. The material choices, the material, not just how it looks, like the paint, the color, the energy value, because in some parts of the world, heat and cooling is a very significant part of construction. The energy value of those materials, the fire rating, because for some parts of the world, fires are very common and very destructive. How is the material fire rated? All of that data needs to go into a model. I need to know how to package it for the person who needs it to be able to use it. So that is where I need to learn how to make the software do all of these things and let the architects focus on the dream and the vision.
Okay, so how then can someone in a developing country like Nigeria position themselves for these global trends in?
Great. I love that question. Now, one of my biggest aha moments moving to Canada was that a lot of the work for BIM modeling is outsourced to India. And I don't think it's just Canada. I think in many Western countries, the cost of labor is higher. And just like in fashion, where it's outsourced to countries where means of production is cheaper, the same thing happens in BIM. You need experts, architects, BIM managers to do the high level stuff. But for the actual modeling, where the senior architects don't have the time to model, paying a junior architect to model it in, let's say, Canada is times 5 what you'd pay a Nigerian in Nigeria to model that same thing, right? I think, especially in Nigeria, we need to stop undervaluing what we already have. I love that we always want to compete at the same level as the world. It's fantastic. It's one of the things that gives me the drive that I have till today. But because of that, we sometimes forget what we already possess. And I'll tell you, we are one of the largest collective group of people where architects use Revit that I've ever seen anywhere. And I think if we, the challenge for us will not be the BIM or the Revit. The challenge would be the infrastructure problems that we have. Can you deliver on time? Can you jump on a Zoom call in someone else's time zone? Do you know how to clean data, not just model a wall, drag it to level 3 instead of splitting it up? Learning how to structure and package a model in a professional manner. How do I make a family that is not too heavy? That sort of thing. BIM modeling as a service is a very valuable service because it is time consuming, and the means of achieving that in more expensive countries is costlier. So they are always looking to outsource. There are many people who have capitalized on this as a business. The reason it's challenging is making a name for yourself. Like, you have to break into the market somehow. But more importantly, reliability. I understand that because of the challenges we have in Nigeria, it's very easy to be unreliable and everyone just forgives it. It's not quite the case. If you're going to have foreign clients, being on time, like to the minute, being specific with your costs, not like today you charge me this, but because of exchange rate, you're charging me 5 times. Like, it's those things that are the challenge, but not the BIM. And so for anyone who's looking to do BIM in Nigeria, I'd say work locally in terms of speaking on platforms like these to educate people. But if you are going to sustain yourself economically, also think of supporting the global market. There are many countries that are not as ahead as you might imagine. They have framework, they have specialists, but they may not necessarily be ahead in the way that you might think. If you have a platform that is global, like YouTube or wherever, you can start to gain that attention and that support. Balkan Architect has taught everyone in the world Revit. I've schooled in the Balkans. I know what life is like there. I think we underestimate what it took for him as a person to see it as this is something I want to do for the world. And he that's his full-time business today, right? You as a Nigerian would not imagine that someone in the Balkans also has the same challenges you have when it comes to BIM. But more often than not, we're all experiencing in one degree or the other, the human experience is very, very similar. So I'd say we should really start seeing ourselves more positively. And also in the messaging and how we communicate, we shouldn't be quick to highlight our challenges. We're so excited to just show the world our challenges. But everyone is going through challenges. They're just not talking about it as often as we do. Um, frame things in a more positive mindset and be more open to ideas that challenge your perception of the world. Yeah, that's
Okay. Thank you so much for giving a detailed response to that question. But then I
sure.
would say, are there global standards or frameworks BIM professionals must align with to work on international projects? And how accessible are these for architects in the global south?
That's a very good question. I'll take it piece by piece. Are there standards? Yes. Are you required to adhere to them? Not necessarily, because the standards are often guidelines that you are expected to adapt to your local context. So I think BIM Africa, up to a point, did a lot of work in that regard. So you don't necessarily even need you don't need to apply a global standard in a localized context if your context already has its own standards. The standards are supposed to guide everyone. It's supposed to work for you. So are they accessible? If you have a certain amount of money, yes. But I know that the finances are often the challenge. So that is where it becomes challenging. But if you are curious and persistent, you will find the information. Because I think one more thing I would say is we often think about these things as like invisible structures. Like, is there a global standard? Is there like it's like this invisible, the world is run by people.
Yeah.
Everything you see was made by a person. If you don't have access to the like ephemeral resource that's in the ether somewhere, find the person. And even the skill of knowing how to find people is a skill. Knowing how to not be a pain and be polite and respectful of people's time, presenting yourself in a professional manner, that is a skill. So there are ways to do these things. It's just that anything new and unexplored will be challenging. And that is why there needs to be a certain level of personal conviction to succeed. I think just last year, Kende did a Contech summit, right? It was a very big summit. It was well attended. A lot of people he invited, he nibbed from my wedding because I invited them all to my wedding. But he came to my wedding, he was ready to network. But that's why I like Kende. He's very hungry. He wants to do things. You have to really work with people. If you don't have like financial resources, then people are your next best thing. And knowing how to be used, because it's easy to just want to take from people, but the best way to get things from people is to be useful. Yes. So learning how to be useful to the people you want help from, I think will help any young professional in Nigeria that wants to stand out, because it's not without its challenges. It's an uphill climb in some ways, but it is not impossible. Especially if you don't have that option of maybe moving somewhere else, then you have to make do with what you have from where you are. And you could even be the brain behind, you don't always need to follow. You could be the one to discover a way to make BIM work for Nigerians. Because the way BIM works in countries where they can spend money on all of the software may not work in Nigeria. But if no one takes out that time to step back and say, okay, how can I actually propose? I'll give you an example. The banking system in Nigeria is the best I've ever had anywhere.
Really?
Because the finance industry sat down and was like, how do we make this work for our people? They didn't copy any finance model from other countries. And it is very, I mean, maybe not as today, because I know things have changed since I left. But at the time, like the way you get your statements, the way you get your SMS, I don't know any bank that sends me SMS in the way that Nigerian banks do in terms of just giving you things that you want. You have these harsh code star, whatever you get. Those things, we take them for granted. But that was someone thinking solution for my context. So if you learn about the global goals, what was intended, then you take a step back, and instead of forcing a system that doesn't work, you create a system that actually works. This again requires personal sacrifice. It's personal sacrifice, but it's always worth it. And that's why I always encourage people, the best thing you can do for yourself, professionally, personally, is to know your limits. Know where you cannot or you will not go. I think I'm more useful where I am to even people like yourself. If you talk to someone like Kehinde, he really wants to be in the Nigerian market and change it from within. That is his mission. He's ready to do what it takes, make the sacrifices. So it's more of knowing yourself and not dismissing what you have to offer. Even just you taking the time to record this on your weekend, it will spark conversation that will create its own impact. So don't underestimate your small contribution. Don't think that someone else has to do it or someone else has to lead it. Take it on as every day you show up. How can you just make things even just 0.1% better than before?
Thank you so much for that response. Okay, so have you worked with international firms like Architecture 49? How do BIM practices in Nigeria compare to those in countries like Canada? What lessons have you shared between these two contexts?
That's a very good question. In Nigeria, I had more flexibility because we don't have as much legal restrictions on professionals. The average professional in a Western country is really preparing for the possibility of being sued. It is pervasive in decision making, in accepting of responsibility. And that is why, in quote, we see that these systems work. The system works because for lack of a better term, punishment for not working is high, right? It supports excellence, but it also makes people risk averse, where people are less willing to take a risk on something because there might be a consequence that is negative. In Nigeria, I did not have that problem. If I said, let's do a point cloud scan, I'd be done by 5 p.m. And no one would question, did we sign the document? Did we get the permission? Did we do the thing? Did we do the thing? It would be done. Here, I don't have as much freedom. I need to be aware of the laws regarding anything I want to do. And it's not a discouragement. It's just regulated. Things are regulated. And that is why there's a certain level of excellence at the end, because people have to follow a certain standard, right? In Nigeria as well, everyone knew Revit. I didn't have to worry about teaching people Revit. Here, I have to deal with people who are embracing Revit for the first time in their whole career. So there's that. But here, I would say the clients are more aware of what BIM should be. In some cases, I'm also living in a city, so this isn't a universal experience. If I was living in a more maybe smaller province, I don't think it would be the case, right? From the city where I live, the clients know about BIM. They have BIM specialists in their team. When they're coming to you with a brief, there's a BIM person that has sat with them to develop that brief. So what they're asking you is informed. They're not just asking, give me BIM. They know what BIM is and they know what they can get from it and why they need it. So in that way, I have to do less explaining. I don't have to keep telling people, this is why this is important. This is why we have to do it this way. It's required for the project to succeed. Also, people, and again, it's different in Europe than in Canada because I think they're just more advanced in Europe in terms of global requirement, like government requiring people to do BIM. We don't really have that in Canada as such. It's more of clients. And also training. Europe has masters in BIM programs that have been there since 2008. The ones in Canada are relatively more recent. So the people in Europe doing BIM have had years to refine their process. In Nigeria, we have individual stars. I still have a lot of people I go to when I need to just consult on certain things that are Nigerians. We don't have a collective, we don't have critical mass. We have the one person that's the star in one place and the one firm that does Revit in one place. So that is why we are not seeing the values that we're just doing it. And that's a much more cultural, deeper cultural issue. It's not just BIM specific. We are more likely to take someone's idea and claim it as our own. No one would even think to do that here because it's just no need to. So that fear of let me not make it public so someone doesn't steal it, it doesn't exist here because no one would. And even if they did, there's enough of a legal backing to pursue that person. So it's more of the cultural challenges get reflected in the practice more than anything. But I find even just the purchasing power, like my ability to just buy a software on my own for my own learning, most Nigerians don't have that.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference I'd say is we have the right mindsets, energy, attitude. Our infrastructural problems are not unique to BIM and they're affecting what we do as BIM people. But also just that lack of collaboration. I think you've learned a lot more today in just a few hours than some people will ever learn in their whole careers because you thought to ask. A lot of Nigerians are just in their bubble, talking to themselves, sharing the same ideas that they have. They don't reach out. And then we have a small, what's the word? We sort of exalt our challenges. What that means is we assume no one else is going through the same challenge. So when someone is explaining a solution to you, before you even heard the person, you've thought of all the reasons why it won't work. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's coming from you think that all of these challenges we face in Nigeria are unique to Nigeria. Versus, oh, maybe there is a way that someone else has tried. Because you'd be surprised. I think every Nigerian who ever travels, they always come up with these videos. Like everyone just thinks, oh, it's so much better. Like you see there's challenges everywhere. People just find a way and they keep going. So that's the main difference. It's more of a mindset and more specifically mindset driven by economic factors. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response. So I was going to pick on something you just said and to ask, do you interface directly with clients or do you work with a firm undergoing the BIM process?
Right now, I work with a firm that's undergoing the BIM process. I work with a firm that has projects that have forced them to undergo the BIM process. Okay. I'm not the first BIM person. There was already a BIM manager when I got here. And even that might have played a role in my joining them because if you're getting hired by a bunch of architects and you're coming as a BIM person, no one on that table knows what you're saying. But if there's a BIM person in the hiring panel, they can say, oh, this person has something we need. Let's hire them. So it's different factors. But I think the point I'm trying to drive home for anyone watching this is that these factors are not uniquely Nigerian. There are other architecture firms, even in Toronto, that don't really have BIM people. Yeah. So it's not like once you leave Nigeria, you just do BIM. You have to still be strategic and a bit proactive in how you communicate your skill sets. So I'm not saying it to discourage anyone because I think listening to me, it sounds almost like, oh, how do I even start? The point I'm trying to make is that if you wish to achieve something, no matter how challenging, things do align. Yeah. In one way, shape, or form. And we're all exploring. Tomorrow I might just be like, I don't know, something else. Right? So don't be too rigid in your expectations from life as well. BIM is something I've been fortunate to have pushed this far, and because I have so much collected experience over the years, I'm still valuable. I'm still useful to the teams. If at some point things change, people stop delivering projects in BIM, I will also have to change. There was a time there was a CAD manager. Those no longer exist. They're now BIM managers. So you have to flow with the times. Like don't be too rigid in I must do this thing, because the times change. You're operating in a business context. So always think, how does what I am or what I'm trying to do support the business goal? That's what you should always have at the back of your mind.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we go over to the opportunities and the future of workforce? You mentor a lot of professionals. Where do you see the biggest career opportunities right now in architecture for those willing to embrace tech? I think you mentioned this a little.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it with AI. I think for people who are willing to embrace tech, I'd say to learn about data. If we are thinking about machine learning, AI, all of these things, it's all data. It's all built on data. And the only way architects will get the value is if we have clean data, which we don't have. We all know we don't have clean data. It's a universal truth, because we focus on the drawings, so we are less concerned about the data. I think anyone who comes up with a good solution that will support the creation of structured data so that architects can start to leverage machine learning and any other tool that will come in the future, will have a very big opportunity on their hands.
Do you think BIM could become a pathway for architects to break into non-traditional sectors like tech, data science, urban analysis, or even gaming and film?
I think it's already a pathway. I know there are many BIM people that have made this switch into gaming, film, software development. I think that it's also going to have to be a mission, because you will not be in an architecture firm and learn the skills you need to pivot to game and film. You would need to spend time learning how to apply your skills to game and film. So yes, these skills are universal. BIM is a support role in the end, so you can support any industry. There are people who apply the knowledge of data, structuring data, even in healthcare, because healthcare uses a lot of software as well. And healthcare need for data integrity is more critical because it's human life. So these are skills you can definitely apply if you have the right mindsets. But if you're still thinking like an architect, then it's unlikely, because the architectural mindset is also transferable. To be very frank, like architectural design supports you to think creatively, but it has to be a bit more intentional, and also research the qualifications required for that industry. So I know for a fact that data science is a bit more strict in terms of education versus, let's say, software engineering. There are some fields where you would have to go back to school. They won't accept like online courses. So before you jump into anyone, you take some time and look at the job adverts and see what they're asking for. And if you're lucky to talk to a few people and see what you can do, because there are limits to what you can do, especially depending on age, circumstance, goals, what you want to spend your time doing. For every switch you make, you will need to invest sometimes being a beginner. You can't rush to being an expert. So if you've already spent time, it's never too late to make the change, but be aware that it will take more time. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, thank you for that response. So I think for anyone watching this interview so far, and for any young architect watching this and wants to specialize in BIM, what are the exact first steps that one should take after this interview?
Great. So first step is to ask yourself, why do you want to do BIM? If you still want to be designing buildings, but you like the technical aspect, then there's a strong chance you just want to be an architect that knows how to use tools effectively. And I'd say to keep doing what you're doing and keep learning as much as you can. If you find that the design aspect does not fulfill you at all, and you want to do the technology aspect of BIM, I'd start with people on YouTube. Start with the Balkan architects, Aussie BIM gurus, myself, Revit kids. There's so many people on YouTube. I'd go on LinkedIn and follow all these people, because by following them, you see what they're talking about and what they're thinking about, and then you follow who they follow. I would go on LinkedIn Learning if you can get a subscription or a free trial, and do the BIM manager path. There is a become a BIM manager learning path. And that will at least explain to you more what the mindset is. And from there, I'd look into some form of formal certification. Depending on the kind of industry you're operating, there are certifications they recognize. If you are a project manager, for example, you can still be a project manager that knows BIM and uses BIM to make your projects more successful. If you're in a place where BIM is recognized, you can do an ISO certification or a BIM practitioner certification. Certificates don't necessarily hold value that is easily seen. What I'm trying to say is, and it goes back to my other point as to we work with people. When you work with people, if you have a Harvard degree and I don't know what Harvard is, your degree means nothing to me.
Mm-hmm.
It only means something to the people who know what Harvard means. If you have a certificate in some course or something, the person in your interview has no idea what that is. Your certificate is meaningless.
Yeah.
And that is why the easiest way people have grown into BIM is by going in as an architect or whatever and starting to contribute value in a BIM sense. And once you start contributing value and you're making a company more efficient or helping them save money, you have leverage to ask for things like, oh, I think I should be a BIM manager or a BIM coordinator. Or I think I want to do BIM. You can't just go asking without giving, right? So it depends on your context. From where I live, there are many BIM jobs. You can just apply for a BIM job and get it.
Yeah.
There are many BIM programs as well where people go do a master's degree in BIM. And I also live in a context where having a degree is kind of important. So it will depend on your personal circumstances. But at the end of the day, you need to be sure this is what you want to do, because you could get into it and find that it's not what you thought it was. Most of my time is not spent on the job managing technology. I'm managing people. I'm answering questions. I'm running to fix someone who thought it was a good idea to explode CAD. So there's all of these challenges that are not exciting on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And so this has to be more than just a fantasy of what you think it is. So research, I've done many interviews on my channel with people like Gavin Crump, Michelle, people who've been doing BIM even longer than me. We have the same like conclusions on what the challenges could be. Don't ignore them, and it shouldn't discourage you. But when you move with awareness, you are more prepared for what you're getting into.
Okay. What you just mentioned about your channel, what inspired you to start the BIM Mentor channel?
That's a very good question. I started that channel to be more visible because a lot of people at my level of experience know me, but a lot of other people just don't know who I am. And whenever they do these conferences or things, they call all these people who, respectfully, I think I am more experienced than they are. Not to diminish them in any way. I think they're all fantastic. It's just I started noticing that most people just didn't know who I was and what I've been doing. Except for the people who already knew me because we were peers. And so I wanted to just be a bit more visible, but also provide support to the next generation because I've learned a lot of things by just trying. And so I wanted a platform to share that. And finally, I wanted proof of concept. When I walk into a room and I say I know BIM, architecture is easy. You show a portfolio. There's not too many ways to show that you know BIM without being on the job. So I needed a way of documenting my expertise, which is still a work in progress. But what's interesting is when I started, I noticed that a lot more people were happy with my coding content. And so I sort of pivoted into more coding style videos. But my initial thing, and that's why it's called the BIM mentor, was to actually just mentor people in a more approachable way, because I may not have the time to speak to everyone one-on-one. So it was supposed to be an online diary of sorts of just my experience and guiding people, just like what we're discussing in this video.
Okay, thank you for that response. And I think this question is coming from a student. And because you've been mentioning Revit. So a student asks, I am an architecture student and I want to go into BIM. I'm considering learning ArchiCAD or Revit. Which one is better and why? Which one should I learn first? And where do I get a good course, if possible, for free? I know you've mentioned YouTube as well.
YouTube is the best place to get it for free. And I think I want to address this for free thing. I grew up in Nigeria, so I'm not unaware of why you need it to be for free. But I think you need to appreciate that there are people who spend time and effort doing these things, and they need to also feed their families. So I think the mindset of wanting things for free, it goes both ways. If you want something free, it may not be of a certain quality. Or if it's of a certain quality, it might not be free. Because the person recording is also a person. They too have financial needs, right? I think we need to remember that. However, YouTube has very good Revit tutorials. I would recommend Revit, not because it's better than ArchiCAD. In my opinion, I don't think it is, but it is the industry standard for now. So you need it. You can learn ArchiCAD after, but the chances of going to a firm where they use ArchiCAD versus Revit are less. If you want to go into BIM and you're not just asking a question about which software should you learn, you should learn both, because that's our jobs. We learn everything. We are the people who learn the software for everyone. That's literally the job. Um, but start with Revit, I'd say. And the Balkan Architect is a good place to start.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. So now let's have the real talk. How financially rewarding has this career path been compared to expected traditional roles or traditional practice?
That's a good question, and a question only a Nigerian would ask, because talking about money is kind of taboo in other parts of the world. People just don't talk about money. It's like a impolite conversation. Um, it hasn't been different from architecture in terms of financially rewarding, because I've always worked for architects. So I'm on the same scale of remuneration as the average architect. Navigating salary is a very different thing from building a career. And I think if you're focused on salary, you will not build a successful career. The reason being, the money isn't determined by how much is someone paying for this. It's demand versus supply. How many people need this service versus how many people can provide this service? The ratio of architects that can provide architectural services is higher than the ratio of actual BIM experts that can provide BIM services. My opportunity to get 2 scholarships to go to 2 different schools to do master's programs in Europe fully funded is because I started leaning away from a traditional path. There was more funding at that time. I don't think it's the case anymore for BIM because it was new. People wanted to understand it. Governments wanted to fund it. When you're doing anything and you want to be financially successful, you have to think about value first, not salary or how much do they pay. BIM is lucrative depending on your ability to make it lucrative. If you don't think broadly and you just stay and you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do, you won't earn more than you are worth. The people who make big money in any field are the people who provide serious value to the business. It doesn't matter what your title is called. So I just wanted to address that mentality. But in terms of like, is it well paying? If you're in a country where there's a structure for BIM, it is well paying. It is not significantly more well-paying. And at a certain level where you're supported by infrastructure, the definition of how much you need to earn to be happy changes. In Nigeria, because we have so many infrastructure challenges, you need a lot of income. But there's not that much you need to support if you're not living in Nigeria. So the difference in your quality of life in one field versus the other is not significant. So it's really just more, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Right? In Nigeria, because BIM is not really structured, you may never really even get a full BIM role until you create one for yourself. And the way you create one for yourself is helping the business see value and make money from it. And if you start to make a business money, you can ask for what you want to be paid. So I think, especially as young people, we need to educate ourselves a bit more on how businesses actually run. It's not just what do I want to do? How much do they pay me? It's a whole system of providing services to make money. And it's demand and supply.
Yeah.
Let's even go back to who is paying for architectural services. It's a client.
True.
Does your client want a BIM service?
Mm.
And if they don't want it, is it because they don't know what it does for them? How do you communicate that to them? If they do know, then why are they not paying? So these are bigger questions. Asking about salary, I think it's a limited way. And if that's your main concern, if you want like a structure, do you want to go from this salary to this salary? I don't recommend BIM because BIM is too uncertain. Okay, so the question about salary is relative to where you work. If you work in Nigeria, I think it's about the same as being an architect because you would rarely be working outside of an architectural practice. So salary scales are controlled by experience, education, seniority, and also the firm's organizational structure. If there is a good HR in position, then the firm will have its own metrics for salary. They don't necessarily depend on what you do. I think the bigger challenge is in convincing both your leadership and even your clients of the value of BIM. But elsewhere, it's also about the same, slightly higher because a BIM practitioner is usually more experienced than, let's say, a junior architect. So a BIM practitioner would have done maybe a first degree and sometimes a second degree in architecture and then done more to train themselves on BIM. So they are a specialist that have gone beyond the requirement. And so they are considered, you are paid for your experience and value. So it depends on where you're able to work. It's not a bad choice because there are many opportunities for funding outside of salary. It is something that has a lot of funding support. I think that might change now because of AI. I think more funding is going towards supporting AI. But when you think about money, I think there is more to making money than salary. Some people will make money from their BIM courses or BIM products they make for families. The timeline for BIM has also changed because when I started, there wasn't as much. So people who started then made more money because they were supporting more people. But now it's getting a bit saturated. So you make money by making yourself stand out. Find something you can solve that only you can solve. Whether that's BIM for a Nigerian context and telling the business owners that this is why BIM as it's applied everywhere in the world doesn't work, and this is why you think it will work here. So I wouldn't limit myself to salary, because there are more than one way to make money from what you do, and it's more about being creative.
Okay. But then, is there a career progression, or you just be BIM manager and that's it?
That's a question even I have at my level, that no one has been able to answer is what comes next from this. I think it's hard to answer because if you look at the timeline of BIM, we only started BIM officially in like 2016, in many parts of the world. BIM has existed like since 2008 or 5 or so, but for many parts of the world, they only started to have it as roles from 2016 or 15. So they haven't thought about what comes next. And in many cases, people who do BIM even evolve into something else. Just like architects, people who do architecture evolve into maybe not even designing at all after a while. So it's the same with BIM, is that you grow, and then sometimes you become a director of technology or a CTO, chief technology officer, or head of innovation. It depends on where you are. And I think the people that have made the most from BIM did not let the industry define them. If anything, they defined the industry. They created the role and told the industry, this is the role that you want. So BIM is it's a very self-led endeavor. There's not a lot of predefined structure. And if that bothers you, then you should really think about if this is what you want to do. You have to be the one to keep pushing for what you want in many cases.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. This question is coming from a student, and it says, as a student who wants to stay ahead of the curve, I am curious to hear about your experience with AI, as we can also major tech companies are heavily investing in this direction. What AI softwares are you using to assist in your work field? And what do you think the future of our work will look like using AI tools?
I think that's a whole other video session, but I'll try and answer briefly. I'm using ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity the most. For rendering, I use Minimal AI, it's mnml.ai, and Evolve Lab Veras. If any of these mean anything to you, congrats, you're already ahead of the curve. AI is something that is self-teaching. It's good for self-teaching. So even this question is a question I would ask AI, because you would get a much more robust answer than I can give in a few minutes. AI is changing how I work because I code and I manage data. And in many cases, there are not many people I can ask how to do things. And so I go to AI. AI is my assistant and my senior colleague and my idea bouncer. When I have an idea and I need to poke holes in it, I ask AI. AI is capable of the fact that you can have a conversation with the technology makes it very different. So AI has changed work. I think unfortunately, because we are often at the receiving end on some of these things, it's always a question of how will it happen? It's happening. It's happened. It's just taking time to spread and become more accessible. And even professionals here are trying to define what this means. We're already using AI in our firm for rendering and for documentation, like proposals, RFPs, RFIs. So we're trying to define as an organization what are our limits, because AI is not perfect and there are also ethical considerations. If you put your client's private data on AI, that's a very big harm to them and also to yourself. If you trust AI without checking, AI is not perfect. It will give you wrong answers. It doesn't behave like Google where you have no results found. There's always going to be a result found if you use AI. So the question is not how will it change, more like how do you change to what AI can do? Because it has become synonymous now with people who do anything that has to do with writing or image creation or researching. But my personal favorite use case for AI is in teaching myself things, because rather than spending hours searching Google, AI condenses all that information in a way that I can digest. And if I don't like my answer, I can keep asking for more answers.
What skills or courses or certifications should one focus on to be ahead of the curve?
With AI?
Yeah, both with AI and in BIM, especially to get properly paid.
I like that people want like a blueprint, but there is no blueprint. The blueprint is you consistently seeking. BIM is a solution to a problem. So the better question is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? There isn't like a plan of do this, then do this, then do this. That's architecture. And that's again the architecture mindset where You've only talked to architects, and so all you know is just how architecture works. Make friends that are not in architecture, and you start to see that how they navigate career progression is very different.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no course, there's no specific thing. Most of my AI knowledge has come from trying to follow people who are doing AI, talking to them. I did do 2 courses. I'm not going to publicly endorse them because that's not what this is about. And I don't even think I learned them as someone who teaches people about AI. As a user of AI, I don't think I needed those courses. It's more of you asking intelligent questions. What problem can I solve? And ask AI, I have this problem. How do I solve it? How do I pitch BIM in a context where the clients don't want to pay? And you'd be surprised.
Wow.
So it's more of asking AI questions versus how do AI doesn't need training. That's why it's so groundbreaking. It's just language. You just ask it a question. And the more you ask, the better you get. For images though, because I know this is a design profession, I'd recommend playing around with Midjourney. Is a popular one. It's not free, but it's good for exploring those ideas. And as you use it, you start to define the blueprint. A lot of things exist because someone went first. So if you're going to be a leader and get the benefits of leadership, the recognition, the money, you need to be willing to be the first one and then tell us what the blueprint is. I think that's the summary for that question.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Then I think I'll ask this. Many architects still view success as becoming a lead designer or owning a firm. For you, how do you design or how do you define success from your role as a BIM architect?
That's a very good, very, very, very good question. I've had to decenter career as a measure for my success in anything because I think it's a recipe for heartbreak. The world is changing too fast. It didn't used to be the case. In the past, you could have this very predictable, this is what I'm doing. I'll work X number of years. I'll retire as this. The world has changed. It's not like that anymore. If you go with that old model, you may be disappointed. So it will keep changing. It will change forever, like till you retire. You have to relearn and relearn and relearn. Success for me is solving a problem that no one else was able to solve. And it's happened on many occasions in this BIM path. I can't say it has happened in architecture because I cannot be Frank Lloyd Wright. I am not those legends. And that's for me the appeal of BIM is that I actually wanted to go in the uncharted. That's why I'm saying that BIM is a personality. If you want things laid out, clearly spelled out, I would seriously question if this is for you. People who I find enjoy BIM like to be in unknown territory. They like to see a problem that has not been solved and be crazy enough to try and solve it. So it sounds big, but honestly, solutions to problems sometimes are just in your face, but no one has time because the architecture is so busy. Everyone is so busy. There's deadlines. They're so busy. So sometimes it's not like I'm saying you have to be a genius. Before I started my YouTube channel, if you had asked me if I'd ever be teaching coding, I'd just be like, ha, I'm not one of those like, I don't, there's certain people you see and you're just like, if only. No, I've had to work very hard and put many hours to say all these things I'm saying. So I think it's a commitment to what makes you happy as a person versus how do I signal to the world that I have succeeded? Because a lot of the success we chase is to make other people feel like we've succeeded. And if you waste your life doing that, you get there and realize no one was paying attention all along. No one noticed. So you have to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. For me, I like the pleasure of a team of very senior professionals being frustrated about an issue, and me and my group of people are able to come together and find a solution. That for me is success. And as I move forward, I would hope that I'm able to influence a larger scale of people, not just my office or my team. So a title, the thing about titles is until very recently, I would have said maybe being like a head of innovation or chief innovation officer. That's something that would be nice to have. But when you get to that title, what's there on the other side of the title is the work that you have to do. And in many cases, when you are a lead, the CEO, CIO, whatever it is, you're leading people. You're not leading technology. You're not leading design. It's people. This one needs to go on sick leave. This one's like, it's people management. So I think we need to be very unromantic about our goals. Like, don't create a picture of a goal that is not based in reality. And don't have a mindset of weakness where if you see something challenging, you're like, I can't do it, it's too hard. No, you can. Most people who have done hard things only became strong because of the hard things. It's not like you are strong before. It's by choosing to enter that you become strong. So you can if you want to, but because you will be tested, you have to be sure that you really want to. That's like the high level answer. But for someone who's just like, I don't know what I want to do in my life, but I think this BIM thing is cool. Why don't I just do it? There are not many structured programs. There's courses from like Ziggurat. There's all these courses you can take, but a lot of it is experience. The most competent technical BIM people learned by working in an office and solving problems. So don't feel like if you don't have the means, you need to do a course. It's really, can you, when they ask you certain questions, okay, what do you know about clash detection? So there's a whole thing about BIM uses where BIM, what is BIM used for? Costing, clash detection, those sort of things. If you know the different BIM uses, all you need to learn is, okay, how do I deliver these uses? For costing, which software is out there? For clash detection, which software is out there? For rendering, which software is out there? For energy analysis, which software is out there? And then from there, you learn those software, or at least you learn what they can do, even if you don't learn them in depth. And then you start to know, okay, if my company is having an issue where we want to do as built modeling or we want to do something, they are trying to send someone on a plane to go and capture it. Why don't we just get someone there to send us the data as pictures? You tell that to your boss, they'll be happy because they don't want to pay that flight, right? So it's a very, for now, I think it will change as more people get senior and start to influence the workplace. But we're in an age where most of the BIM people are younger. And so the workplace hasn't evolved to support us in a structured way. It is up to us, unfortunately, to create that structure. So that's my perspective. Someone else might think differently, but that's what I think.
Thank you so much for that response. And would you say you've had access to more global opportunities because of BIM expertise, especially for someone who is just coming from a developing country where this BIM is not that not yet in huge. Would you advise the person to go to an enabling environment, or what do you think?
I think to answer the first question, have I had more opportunities? Yes, because like I mentioned at the beginning, architecture is location specific. So when you move from a location, you are no longer an expert. BIM has supported me to just move freely and not worry about starting from scratch with education, with training, with licensing. The other part of the question is, has like someone coming from a developing country? So I think you might need to repeat that because I caught it, but I've lost my train of thought.
I was saying, for someone coming from a developing country where BIM is not yet a thing, would you advise they relocate to, especially for someone that has passion, would you advise they relocate to an enabling environment?
An enabling environment. I think this depends on the individual. I think some people have the capacity to change people and some people don't. And I think you need to ask yourself, which one you are and then make your decision. And I also think you need to be sure that even when you move to an enabling environment and you start doing this work, that this is what you want to do. Because there isn't any context of this world where there isn't challenges. And I know some people imagine moving as a way to escape challenges, but you will meet new challenges. So it's a deeper question of your resilience as an individual. I've made the move, so I cannot discourage anyone from moving because it has been beneficial for me. But if you do not have the means, it's not something to despair about. From where you are, it's the strength of ideas and sort of entrepreneurial thinking. People who did these animation studios that get collaborations with Disney and all these things, they are Nigerians, they live in Nigeria. The difference is that they see themselves as valuable enough to say, oh, I'm going to pitch my idea to Disney. Like, I think we need to stop seeing ourselves as I'm a developing country. Those are labels that someone else created. We live there. We know we are not at that, like, developed, like, economically, yes, but as intellectuals, we can compete on a global scale. So if you have the means to and you want to, it's definitely beneficial. If you don't have the means to, don't pause your life until you move. Like, it's a waste of youth, it's a waste of energy to say you won't make anything of yourself until you've moved to a different country. And I know it's easy to say from where I am, but the reality is life is different for everyone, and you cannot lock up your happiness or your ability to thrive to someone else's circumstances. If you do get the opportunity to move, I'd say you should take it. But if you don't, you can make something of yourself from where you are.
Okay, I think I will end this session without bringing this in. As a mother, as a wife, and as a woman, how have you been navigating this journey?
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm not a mother yet. I'm just a wife. It's not been hard at all. And when I say this to people, I always get very interesting reactions. I think, first of all, I'm very fortunate in the partner that I'm married to. And fortunate both in the sense that this is the person I'm married to, but also that I was aware of who I was and what I needed to do with my life. So it's a question that's not really related to architecture or BIM, but I understand the importance of asking it because of our unique context. A lot of the challenges you will face in your life, if you give the responsibility to someone else, as in, this person is the reason why I am like this country is the reason why I am like this, you will not find a way to make it work. I'm not saying that those challenges are not real or that you do not have them. I'm saying that from how the human brain works, if you focus on the problem, you will stay in the problem. If you focus on the solution, our brains built all that we see, all of these laptop, webcam, these are human brain, right? If you focus on a solution, the brain will give you a solution. If you're someone younger thinking, oh, when I get married, I won't have time, because you're thinking you will have to maybe be the one doing all of the domestic work. You'd have to be the one, you know, taking care of the kids, that sort of thing. That's not untrue, but it's also a mindset, because there are parts of the world and even people in Nigeria who do think that they will share the responsibility. Like, it's not all men who think that their wife will do everything. It's not all men who will roll their eyes at the thought of helping you out, right? So if you already set that as an expectation, then you'll be fine to just be like, okay, I'm married now, I give up all my dreams. But if you are open, I'm married to a Nigerian, I'm not married to a foreigner. Like, it's not like I married someone who doesn't have the same cultural upbringing. But we both knew that this was not the kind of relationship where I will dump who I am. And if anything, I have been more encouraged to pursue all the things I want to pursue. I have been heavily even at times when I'm like, I'm done, I just want to just chill. Like, nope, no one's, you're not doing that. Like, there is a person who supports the version of you want to be. And if you limit yourself with what you see, you will miss out on that person. I would say the person may not look like what you imagine, because a lot of the times these people exist. You even know them, but because they don't match your own vain requirements, you ignore them. There are men who cook. There are men who you know these people. It's not like we don't know these people, right? But you always have this picture in your brain. So I'd say do a lot of self-work and ask yourself, if you need to marry someone who will help you with domestic things, or at least share that responsibility, what is it saying about who you're with right now or who you're looking to date? Like, be a bit more realistic. I think we have these mental castles in our brains in Nigeria where we just want things. This is how life should be. Life is much more dynamic and complicated. And the reason life seems perfect in any sphere, whether that's Nigeria or abroad, is because people tell you a story. People paint the narrative they want you to see. Everyone is dealing with life, but they won't come out and be like, oh, life is awful. My partner is awful. I'm working too hard. No, they'll tell you it's fine, right? So something I think older generations have that we don't is that they grew up in a very different way where they weren't as easily influenced by other people's ideas. They grew up with real life. Like they dealt with life as it is, and they quickly grew up to be like, okay, this is what life is. If you are going to be a career woman, you can manage domestic responsibilities. Women before you have done it. So it is not novel. It's not new. Is it challenging? Sure. Can you do it? Also, yes. So it's a choice. At the end of the day, it's a choice. At some point, you could decide you're not doing anymore. You owe no one any explanation as to how you wish to live your life. And there are women who've decided they don't want to be bogged down or slowed down, and they've focused on their career. It's personal, it's deeply personal, and something to be aware of. Because what you think fulfills you today might not fulfill you in 20 years' time, right? You might be happy with all career now, and then you look back and you're like, you feel empty, right? Or you might do the family thing and you look back and like, damn, I should have focused on my career. You need to have these honest conversations with yourself and not put the responsibility is not on your partner to be the kind of partner. It's on you to define your limits and then make decisions that support them.
Okay.
And it's easy to say these things to someone who's currently, depending on what you're going through, it's easy to hear me and be like, oh, you're just saying it because what you see is a process of many years of going through whatever you are going through. I'm now on a side where I can speak like in a very like, oh, it will work out, it'll be fine. I fully get it. I know the struggle. All of my education has been through scholarships. There was never any point where there was just some huge pile of money just sitting, waiting for me. I also looked for free software. I also had to use free 30-day trial and like not sleep so that I can make the most of the trial. So I'm not speaking in a kind of high-handed, like I don't understand. I'm just trying to say, if anything, if you get nothing else from this video, is that you're stronger than you might think, and things won't actually break you. Hard things don't break you. So just keep going. That's all I'll say.
Thank you so much for your responses to all the questions. I think it's been an interesting time. It's obvious we're going to have you back.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
To chip in this, looking at the global industry today, what excites you the most? What scares you the most as we step the future of architecture?
What excites me the most is people like yourself, younger people, the amount of young women who've reached out to me that they want to do BIM, between you and I think they're called BIM heroes. I wish I had this. I probably may not have left Nigeria, but at the time I just felt like an island and I wasn't at the position to be an island. it gives me hope that there's a new generation of people who are more enterprising and willing to like find out, like you're just more hungry and you just want to know. And that tells me that in time things will be better. We're also less willing to accept narratives that we don't like. Like we challenge, we question. We're not just like, oh, they told us it's like this, so it must be like this. That gives me hope. What scares me the most is that architects have a habit of, it's a term I like to use now, it's called ostriching. So if you know the ostrich, it puts its head in the sand, but the body is outside, and that's how it hides. That's, I think, something architects do is we hear technology is changing, and we're just like, okay, sure. I just want to do my drawing and submit and go home at 5. That mindset scares me because like everything else, we will be left behind. There's enough research to support that the construction industry is the slowest to adopt technology. We're always lagging behind. And it shows in all of the issues we have with money, salaries, because we're not efficient. It's because we're not thinking like a business, because we're too busy just like, I want to design my design. I don't know when that changes. I hope it starts to change. But that mentality, I think, scares me because it means you can only rise to the level of your leadership. You can only rise to the creativity of the people in charge. So it's either you take charge or you decide to be limited by the people in charge. That's just what it is. And that scares me because I'm still in this space. I haven't left. I still work for architects, right? And every time I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, and I see what I'm not fighting. And that's the other thing, because you asked me a question about the difference between Nigeria and here. In Nigeria, the problem is obvious. It's economical. You need money to do things, right? What you're fighting here is not economics, it's mindset. There is money to do what you want, but you have to convince people that it's worth investing in. And that is a much bigger, money is easy to solve when you get it, because then the money is there. But to deal with a human's mindset requires a different level of communication and skill and persuasion. That is also a skill. I know it's easy to think of skills as technical skills, but soft skills are technical skills that people master. So that's been my thing, is I have done a lot of the technical. I know all the coding. I know all the things. Now I'm thinking, how can I support my career, like you said, to grow beyond this point? And what are the challenges there? And hopefully I succeed. But if I don't, I will be like water and fluidly navigate whatever comes next. Yeah.
Thank you so much for responding to all of the questions. We are grateful to have you.
Thank you for,
yeah,
thank
the
you.
longest interview we've had on ArchitectsCorner so far. And
Maybe it's because I'm young, so I understand. I come from like a place of understanding the challenges, I guess. Yeah.
exactly.
It was fun. Thank you for having me. Your questions were wonderful. I hope this helped someone, and I hope this didn't offend someone. I always mean well, and I respect that we all have different paths in life to work. So if you're an architect watching this and BIM is not for you, don't feel pressurized to do BIM. And if you're a BIM person watching this and you've realized architecture is not for you, don't feel pressurized to do architecture. We have one life to live, and in the end, we owe only ourselves what we want to do with our lives. So just do what works for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.